No white smoke today on agricultural emissions targets. Why not?
We don't have agreement yet, quite frankly. I'm sure we will. But I think we have to go back to first principles here. You know, if you think about the last 100 years or so in Ireland, in the world, it's been a period of enormous progress. Billions of people lifted out of poverty, more people living longer, healthier lives than ever before. We've learned how to fly. We've learned even put a man on the moon, but we've also done a lot of damage. And the planet is not in a good place. It's getting hotter, and we all know the consequences of that are biodiversity loss is really dreadful, and our water, our rivers and seas are increasingly polluted. And I believe we have to be the generation of politicians that turn that around. And I believe we can do that, but we have to do it in such a way that protects people's incomes, their livelihoods, their way of life. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. All government parties are on the same side. We want to protect, in fact, increase farm incomes. We want to protect agriculture and food production, which is a really important part of the rural economy. We want to protect the volume of food production because there's going to be more mouths to feed in the future, not fewer. But we also need to do it in such a way that we make it sustainable. Because if we don't make farming sustainable, if we don't reduce emissions, we won't be growing grass at all in 20 or 30 years' time. And I don't know what we'll be growing, and there won't be farms to pass on to the next generation. And that's why we need to marry all of those objectives, and that's what we're trying to do.
And how do you do that? How do you square that circle? Say, you mentioned polluted rivers and seas there. So some of the most polluted rivers in Ireland are in the southeast. And it's with nitrates, and those nitrates come from farms. And in the southeast as well, you turned the sod recently on a huge new project down in Bellevue, this Glanbia cheese factory, as people are calling it. Hugely important to the agricultural industry.
It is a cheese factory, in fact.
Hugely important to the agricultural industry and hugely important to that part of the country as well. But on Taisce were opposed to it. A lot of environmentalists were opposed to it as well because they say it commits us to a system of intensive farming that does damage. That is the reason there's so many nitrates in that river.
Yeah, and ultimately, Bord Pleanála heard both sides of the argument and ruled in favour of the plant being built, and it went to the courts, and the courts decided the plant should be built. So, you know, we live in a democracy. People have a right to be heard. They were heard, and the courts and Bord Pleanála decided in favour of building it, and that's why I was very happy to turn the sod on that, and it's going to be very important engine of growth and job creation in the southeast, which is the region that has the biggest increase in employment last year, which I'm glad to say, because that's been a big priority of ours, making sure that we have jobs growth in all parts of Ireland, not just in the big cities. How do we do it? How do we improve water quality? Less untreated sewage going into our seas, a big investment programme underway to do that. And it does mean changing the way we use fertilisers and less fertilisers. So it means moving away from nitrates to protected urea. It means using low emissions slurry systems like LESS, for example. And farmers are doing that, quite frankly. So they're on the right path in that regard, but they will have to do more.
They either make your produce more expensive or they reduce your yield. I mean, the farmers are efficient. There's no more efficient workers in the country than farmers. There's a reason they do this, and it's because this increases their yield at the lowest cost. So how in the future are you going to protect those farm incomes and increase those farm incomes and increase the amount of dairy products that we are producing on our farms for this cheese factory and still get them to use different types of fertilisers, more expensive fertilisers or less fertilisers?
Well, you know, I think given the cost of fertiliser at the moment, we're going to see less use of fertiliser this year, and that's why I actually think we'll see agriculture emissions fall next year, even though they went up this year. The fall for a number of different reasons. We need to work with farmers. You know, I've had a chance to visit, model farms. I've seen what Devonish are doing in County Meath. I've been to a really interesting farm in Bartleby in County Cork. I've seen the innovations that are possible. And it does mean using different types of fertiliser. It means mixed swards, which require less fertilisers. It means using low emission systems. There are things that can be done. And that's what we want to achieve. Getting to the point where we maintain the level of food production that we have, increase farm incomes, but also reduce emissions. And that is achievable. And other things we can do as well, of course, is encourage farmers, incentivise them financially to do things like move to organic farming, which is less intensive, but can be profitable. And also, areas like renewable energy, areas like carbon farming, areas like anaerobic digestion. But, we have to put the money behind it. Ultimately, as is the case with anyone who runs a household or a business, it's about the bottom line and whether you can make ends meet, whether you have an asset you can pass on to your family. And we need to make sure that we put the incentives in place to make sure that happens.
What are the targets going to be in your view, or what should they be? Between 22% and 30%. So what's the numerical figure you're pushing?
Yeah, I'm not going to put a figure on it here because it hasn't been agreed and hasn't been decided. Obviously, it'll be in that range. The range for industry, for enterprise, which I'm responsible for, will be 35%. We've pretty much agreed that'll be in that space. So, a bigger contribution being asked for from business and industry than from farmers, and it's important to bear that in mind.
But if farmers, or if 22% is the target set by government for farmers, then they might come back and ask for more from industry. That's what we've been told. Others would have to pick up the slack.
Well, I think what we can do is over-obsess on a precise figure. And when you see how emissions are calculated, there's a lot of margin of error even in how they're calculated at the moment. So I think we shouldn't try to obsess too much on a precise figure. What we need to figure out is how do you actually achieve it. And I believe we need targets that are ambitious, because we need to be ambitious about climate action, but they also need to be achievable. And there's little point in having a figure that you really don't know how to achieve. You can say we'll make up a certain amount by technological developments, whether it's using hydrogen gas in industry in the future, whether it's sustainable aviation fuels in the future, whether it's things like, for example, additives in feed in agriculture for the future. But I think you can only make up so much of it credibly with what they call, the black box, which is to be determined how. And, these are the kind of things that are in the mix at the moment. And, I'm sure we will have agreement on it. And I'm absolutely of the view that we're all on the same side here, the three parties in government. It's not the environmental NGOs versus the farmers. It's not Fine Gael versus the Greens or Charlie McConnell against David Ryan. That's not what
if we get white smoke by, I think Helen McEntee was talking about possibly by Wednesday, if we get white smoke and it's, say, 22%, you're saying that there will not be further announcements then for other sectors? No, no one will come back and look for other sectors to take up the slack, which has been the suggestion.
Well, we may be able to sign off on a set of figures for all sectors on Wednesday. It might be September. It's not going to make an enormous difference in the greater scheme of things, whether it's Wednesday or 5 weeks' time. It's more important, in my view, that we get it right. But nobody can say that we won't come back looking for more from any sector. Unfortunately, we can't say that. What we will do is set the targets. We'll try and achieve them.
No, I'm not talking about way down the line. I'm talking about in terms of the targets. What we've been told is that if the farmers, as we say, if the farmers will only sign up to 22%, that transport, that industry, energy, you name it, that they will have to increase their targets.
No, I think it's less about that and more how much we leave in what's called the black box. The amount to be determined by future technologies, and everyone will have to make a contribution from that. So we'll have a nice little
fudge by Wednesday.
Well, it's not a fudge. It's genuinely saying that things.
But it's a bit of a fudge. You just said that we don't really know what the black box, what's in it, and how it'll work, and what kind of return
we have an idea. We don't know how much it'll work. So it is things like hydrogen. It is things like what they call SAF, which are synthetic aviation fuels. It is things like feed additives, and we know that they can make carbon capture and storage. We know they can make a contribution. The other thing which I think we need to figure out as well, which we're talking about at the moment, is how anaerobic digestion should be counted. So for people who don't know about this, essentially what you can do is you can put slurry, you can put farm waste, you can put grass into what's called an anaerobic digester, and that makes energy. It's a form of renewable energy, renewable electricity. But at the moment, pretty much all of that is counted as reducing our electricity emissions, and only a small amount is counted as reducing our agriculture emissions. And some farmers would say, and I think they have a case, is that this is on a farmyard. It's very different to a solar panel or a wind turbine. This is totally on a farmyard. It's in a farm, and into it goes farm products and farm waste. Shouldn't we get most of the credit for that? So, these are the kind of things that are being discussed. It's a serious conversation. It's a serious discussion. It's real science. It's real numbers. I think maybe sometimes people are getting a bit too hung up on a particular magic figure. It's more about how we get there and how we achieve what we want to achieve, which is protecting farm incomes, protecting the rural economy, and getting our emissions down, because there will be no rural economy if we don't do that.